Hi everyone, welcome back to another fun week of Storytime art. My name is Tyler and I'm very glad that you could join us here today. Today we're going to be looking at fun ways that we can use watercolor paint to mix up some colors and maybe make some fun little creatures and creations. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so to get going today, I've got a couple materials laid out, but what we're going to we'll look at for step one is making some sort of blots or blobs, kind of like this. And we're going to play around with some color and water to get something like that. And then we're going to look at these, sort of arrange them or turn them around and see if we can maybe see, any kind of creatures or monsters. Okay, so this one to me kind of looks like this way. It kind of almost looks like a bit of a squid with the long legs. And this one, if you turn it this way, it almost looks like kind of a bear with spiky hair and like two little legs hanging out like that. So we're going to be making some kind of blotches and blobs, let them dry, and then we'll kind of look at them and see if we can see anything interesting. So I've got a sort of set of watercolor paints here and a few brushes. I've got some watercolor paper. If you don't have these things, that's fine. If you have craft paint, even that works. If you water it down quite a bit, or acrylic paint, the trick is we want it to be really, really watered down. If you don't have any of that, on our first week of Storytime art, we did this fun activity where you take the dried out markers, you put them in a cup, put a little bit of water in them, and then you let that sit for a little bit, and it actually turns into some really, really lovely watercolor paint. All right. I've actually made a whole bunch of those, and I've saved them from previous weeks. So today I'm going to use this stuff though. I also have a pencil and a couple markers. I have black felt tip markers. You can use whatever you like for those. And I have a tiny little bit of salt in here. Not much, just a little bit. And I'm going to show you what we're going to use that for a little bit later. Some paper towels handy nearby just in case, and a little cup of water. So to get started, oh yes, and the paper, I'm using watercolor paper. If you don't have watercolor paper, you can use like heavy cardstock might work, or sort of any thick heavy paper. Mixed media paper will do the trick. You can try it with printer paper, but you might get a little bit of, just try not to put too much water or paint on that paper, because it might kind of bleed through the paper a little bit too much. All right, I'm going to move this here. I've got 3 sheets of paper here that I'm going to be working on. And I find it best for this kind of project, and actually a lot of watercolor projects, to have a couple on the go at the same time, because your watercolor projects, your watercolor paint, you need to give it a little bit of time for it to dry in between painting times. So to get things ready, I'm going to take some water, and I'm going to put a little bit of water on my paints, kind of wake them up a little bit. I sort of go in a sort of twirly motion like that. Rinse off my brush, go into my next color. I'm just sort of prepping all my colors, getting a little bit of water in them, because if I go into them when they're dry, I'm not going to get any color out. The water kind of activates them. And it's really important that you wash your brush in between, because if I didn't, I'd have some green in this yellow and I would end up being kind of brown, which is fine, but I have a brown right over here, so I don't need to make my own brown. All right, and then some red. And the brown. I've got a black over here. I'm going to leave that alone for now, because when you're using black, especially with this kind of application, it can get really, really dark really, really quickly. And what we're going to try and do is get a nice blend between nice and sort of like wet areas but not too much wet. All right, so I'm going to take my my cup and my brush, and I'm just going to put some water right on. You know, you can start with clean water, just kind of like make a little puddle. You don't want to be oversaturating, but you can kind of see where I've put water in there. You can see it's a little bit kind of shiny. You can tip it around a little bit. Ooh, there we go. And what you want is kind of a more random kind of blob thing going on. Now I'm going to take some paint that I've already sort of wet. I'm going to start with blue and just sort of drop it in there. And you can see what happens. The paint that I'm dropping into the little puddle of water, the paint is going to go wherever the water is sitting. It's a really, really cool effect, putting wet paint into a wet surface. Maybe I'll put another little thing there, and maybe that one, put some sort of purple in there. Okay, and that's all I'm going to do for this one. The trick for this part is to know kind of when to stop, and that's why I find having a couple sheets here ready to go is a really, really handy thing. So you don't have to, you know, if I kept adding water and paint to this, it would end up being a kind of a sludgy mess. All right, I'm going to clean my brush again and put a little bit of water on here. This time I'm just going to kind of do a dot or a circle. And now I'm going to use maybe some warmer colors. I used some cool colors for the first one, blue and purple. I'm going to drop some red in there. Maybe a little bit of orange. And maybe a tiny little bit of brown. Okay. And then what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to kind of give it a little bit of a blow. You can do this with straws, or you can do it just with, okay, and then I've got this kind of cool splatter look, and this is why paper towel is super handy. I'll wipe that up. This paint's all water-based, so I don't have to worry about the table too much. All right, now I'm going to put that one over there. And my next one. Now, this one, my last two were kind of blobby. This one I'm going to make maybe an actual sort of shape. So I'm going to paint a rectangle, maybe kind of a triangle thing come in there. And remember, just like before, we're always going to start with just plain water. And if your water's getting really dirty and murky, you can always sort of change it a little bit. You can swap it out, you know, rinse it out, get some clean water. And I'm going to do some stripes of water and a little bump circle thing over there. All right, and now let's see. Let's go for maybe some green. Drop that in there. Maybe a little bit of yellow. The green and the yellow kind of mix. And if you give it a minute, the water or the paint will spread all around. You can tilt it and tip it a little bit if you want to. Maybe I'll add a little bit more green in the edge over here. If you want to, you can add more things, like, you know, if you like these, you can add another one. You can add another one there or there. But we're going to try not to add too much. Maybe another little bump sort of thing there. We want a very kind of blob look. Now, while this paint is still drying up, I'm going to take a little pinch of salt, just a little bit, and just kind of sprinkle it on there. Now, if you have too much, then it's gonna be a big old mess. But what happens is the salt, there's a little bit of science going on here. The salt, what salt does is it draws in moisture, and it draws in water like a sponge. And because the paint is still active in the wet water, the water is being pulled in like a sponge, and it's going to draw some of the paint in little areas too. And we're going to let this dry and see what it looks like in a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna hit pause for a couple of minutes and then come back, and once these have dried, and see what we've got. You can do lots of these. You can do a whole bunch of them. That's a nice thing about these, is I could do, you know, a handful more and then and see what we've got. Okay, so let's pause for a minute. Okay, so we've given these a couple of moments to dry out. If you're worried or if there's spots that are still a little bit wet, you can always take a paper towel and I just kind of lay it down on top and press it in, or just sort of like lightly, and it will soak up any of the excess that's there. You don't want to be smudging it or smearing it, because then it'll get kind of a paint smear. And you do kind of want to make sure that everything is dry before you move on to the next step. And you can see here in this one, especially with the salt, now the salt can come off and it leaves you with this really, really neat kind of frosty texture, which I think is really cool. So next, you're going to take a look at these. And I find the best way to do these is to look at them one way and then rotate them, look at them another way, and see if you can see if they look like anything that is a little bit recognizable. To me, this one kind of looks a bit like maybe kind of a hippo rhinoceros creature, but with big long spikes coming out of the back, something like that. And in this one, you know, maybe I could look at it this way or this way. I've kind of got maybe kind of a fireball kind of shooting into the sky, something like that. And maybe I'll bring these original ones back into play and work with those a little bit, because these ones are fully dry. There's still a few wet spots on these, but I'll maybe work with that one. But I'll put these ones aside for now. I'm not going to use them right now, but you know, I'll put them aside and maybe I'll use them a little bit later, maybe another day. All right, so now what I'm going to do is start to sketch in and draw where I would like things to go. And if you want to add things, you can sketch them out with pencil first, but if everything is kind of the way you like it, you can skip the pencil stage if you're sure about what you want. I'm going to use pencil to begin so that I can draw in a few things. I'm going to put some teeth in there. Maybe I'll put some feet. Okay, so this guy has, let's see, he has 3 feet right there. And then he's got his little tentacle things. I'm going to use, I've got 2 different kinds of markers here. I've got a regular one, and I've got a fine tip one. So you can use whatever you prefer. I like to use the fine tip ones because you get like a nice kind of fine, a nice fine line going on there. And then I'm going to use my marker to go around the outline of the whole thing as well. Just like that. And then I'm going to continue drawing the feet that I drew in with the pencil. Kind of a weird little green swamp creature kind of thing. And as you can see, I've added a few things in there. You don't have to keep it, you know, you can absolutely add things in there. You know, maybe I want to add a few more kind of these stocky, spiky things. You can even add more things with paint if you want afterwards. You know, if you think this creature needs, you know, maybe something down here or a longer tail or something like that, and you want it to be the color, you can do that. So I'm gonna add a bigger tail in there, maybe some little spikes on the tail, which you can, you know, you can color those in with paint later on if you want. I'm just gonna leave it because I kind of like how it starts green and then it goes off white. And then you can start adding, once you've done sort of the outline, you can start adding things, other things. So maybe I'll put an eye in there. And I think I'll have this guy kind of sleeping. Maybe he's like standing up while he's sleeping. So I just put one little eye in there, put a few more of these. Maybe there's like, you can see his leg kind of coming out like that, and I can color that in, shade that in a little bit, and have a little bit of fun with it, right? You're adding some detail to something. And the nice thing about these is you've let the paint do a lot of the initial work just by doing what it does naturally, just kind of flowing around and mixing. And now you're kind of looking at it and adding things to be more creative. Okay, so there's one. And then I did like how this one kind of looked like a bear with a kind of a spiky hair. So I'm going to draw that. Leg there, other leg. I'm going to draw another little arm over here. Maybe I'll put like kind of a dinosaur tail on him instead of a bear tail, just to have a little bit of fun with it, right? And then after, if I really wanted to, I don't want to add too much, but I'm going to add just a tiny little bit of red paint in there just to fill in that tail, because I think that would be nice. Okay, and it's that simple. So you take a white piece of paper, you do a little blotch on it, let it dry, and then add some lines to give it some character.